Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and Craig Kamanis. Welcome to episode 37 of UncommonCents. Good afternoon to you, Craig.
Afternoon, Dean. How are you today, mate?
Very well. Thanks to you for attending and to our listeners who are joining live on LinkedIn, watching on YouTube, or listening later on while they're doing their evening walk and getting their 10,000 steps in. So, Craig, today we are talking a lot about succession. So while we were warming up for today's session, we were talking about our favorite succession characters. If you haven't watched the Succession series, we both highly recommend it for its real world application and educational purposes. Pretty well, that means you can either claim a tax deduction on it, I think, Craig, or watch it during work hours. So I'll leave you to talk to your boss or ATO about that one. So, Craig, the real side of succession that we want to drill down on and talk about today is obviously, as financial advisors, putting our hat on and working with clients, we deal with this a lot in relation to what I'll call is unplanned succession, so death and disability. We'll touch a little bit on that at the end as we go through. But what I wanted to focus on a little bit more is around the planned succession, and so probably a couple of themes that we're seeing in relation to that we can talk through is the planned succession in and around bringing on younger talent or talent externally into the company. There's a succession around that. There's training talent within the firm and growing them up and having a succession plan there. And then there's actually the succession of frankly selling the business and how that happens in and around staff and advisors that might be in the business. So we're going to talk through those themes today as we go through. And so first question for you to warm us up, Craig, in this context is, what have you, in your experience, obviously going back at BT and things like that, what goes well with planned succession?
Yeah, and Dean, I like planned succession, because hopefully that means that if we shout this from the treetops, that unplanned succession won't ever happen.
Correct.
I know it's a big what if, because sometimes there's just stuff happens, but if we can plan succession enough so unplanned doesn't happen, then that's going to be the critical part to this.
Indeed.
The key to me for planned succession is communication. And communication is critical in everything that I see about this. It's critical in terms of when should I expect to succeed in this business? When will I take over from you if it's an older principal and a younger principal? When would I expect equity? Do I get equity on the journey, or do you want me to buy it off you when we get to that time? What does the plan look like? It's really important that everyone talks, because what I find, if people are guessing, then it creates tension within the business, and therefore people don't know. Or if it's something that drags on and on and on, then you get all these people going, I don't even think it's going to happen. What happens to the team members? Because they sort of know something's going on, but sort of don't.
It's all awkward, isn't it? Like in a lot of ways, it's very awkward for everyone involved, all the way down to the administration teams. They can feel the tension within the company when these things are not clear. Yeah. And so I love your first message in relation to that. We've got to talk about it and have brave conversations, and probably the brave and the frank conversations to make this a reality. So if we don't get everything on the table very quickly and have those conversations, we're just going to keep going around the merry-go-round in terms of this situation. Now, obviously, buyers and sellers are constantly disagreeing about the valuation of companies. Obviously, that's the way the whole thing works. Owners want to sell it for the maximum. Purchasers want to sell it for the minimum. And so this is one example of many that we'll kind of touch on, is that there has to be a conversation and a formula to be developed up front in and around valuation as the very simple one, so that there's no ambiguity today, but especially there's no ambiguity in the future, because we're both trying to document this contract, which is like selling your house in the future. So it's just a contract that doesn't execute today. We're trying to put that contract in place so that when we hit certain targets or time, that the transfer of some or all of the business can happen at that point in time.
Yeah, and Dean, the one thing I've seen, and unfortunately I've seen it over and over again, is the reality that you have partners in business, excuse me, and they become partners as, like, in business, they become friends. They don't become partners, but they become friends. So they become really good friends. And at some point, one of them's going to go before the other. And if those conversations haven't been had, the relationship blows up. And I have seen so many good friends who now no longer talk to each other because they didn't work out the intricacies of pricing that you've just raised and how we would value the business. And so then they've spent months arguing over that. Relationships have deteriorated, and it ended up coming down to arguments over who's going to pay a $50 phone bill and that type of stuff. So if you don't have that pricing in place, particularly, I have seen it so many times create such bad relationship bust-ups for business partners. And it's just not a nice thing, because you should be able to walk away from that really great mate still.
Yes, absolutely. So if we go through the
Yep.
options here, is that if we start with this idea that you're selling maybe part or all of your business over time. So the idea around that succession, just as a strategy to implement, is we're looking internally at that point in time, Craig. So we've got advisors that are competent and moving to excellent advisors, and we want to encourage them to stay in the business. We know that they want to be part and full owners in the business over time, and it's that top shareholder really working out how they are going to share this ownership over time. And I say share because there is an element of the first 10% that you sell may not be at the best price.
Yes.
You might even give it away. I've seen that there's some elements of offering equity early on through there's a variety of different legal structures that we can have, which we won't worry too much about today. But the idea of giving someone some equity to start in a small business, I've seen that as a leg up. I've seen companies loan money to the acquiring shareholder, so they've actually got a loan given to them by the company or an associate to fund the purchase of the shares, for example. And so the advantage of bringing someone in kind of early is they get their training wheels on in this concept of a part-time business owner. So we did this recently in one of our practices, and she became an owner of the business. And the exciting thing for her was to start to learn the stuff about running the business and even being a director. And I went, well, if you want to be a director, you can. And that goes to, we need to, there's the cool side of being a director, but there's also the risk side of being the director. So we just slowed down on that one. But the idea that you put your training wheels on and you start to wear this second hat that you and I have spoken about many times, where you're learning to be a business owner because now you own part of the company. Okay?
Yes.
I think that the moment you own part of the company one way or another, things change. So you be a little bit more aware of paper on the floor or coffee cups in the meeting room. You're a bit more aware of what the experience is from that perspective. You start printing in black and white, for example, as opposed to color, because you are now understanding how your dividend is actually affected by the color printing whether you do it or not do it. And so you start to put your training wheels on in terms of this, getting really clear on what your business plans are, the budgeting, forecast, and numbers. I think that's really valuable at the start of this succession plan when you bring someone in at that starting shareholding level.
Definitely, mate, because it's easy to sit back being an advisor in a firm and thinking all that stuff just happens.
Mm.
And you're right. It's that transition of I now need to put a business owner, CEO type hat on, and so therefore, what does that mean now? Oh, I didn't realize that had to be done. I just thought it got
Yeah.
done. I didn't realize someone had to trigger to pay people. Oh,
I
I
had to
thought it
pay
just
it.
got
Yes.
done. I didn't realize that someone had to order that stuff. And you're right. How many color toners are we now pumping into this thing versus black and white? And what's the
Absolutely,
cost of
absolutely.
ensure?
So that's that initial journey, Craig, of getting 10% ownership or something
Yeah,
thereabouts in the company. And so the next challenge I see as we want to as the smaller shareholder wants to increase their ownership in the company, the next challenge in this succession world is actually how the business funds that, or
yes,
the existing the small shareholder funds that. So the challenge that we all face, assuming we agree on the value of the business, the next challenge is all about, well, how am I going to fund it? Because if I be frank, most of the younger advisors are all geared up on their own residential property and the like, and so the prospect of borrowing more money to buy, let's call it in our worked example today, the 40% ownership of the company, it's going to be a stretch. Now, it might be a stretch because there's no capacity on the home loan over here, which makes it very difficult. And so if you can't borrow personally, either the company might be able to lever itself to let the succession happen, which is one thing, or what we see as well through this succession period is vendor finance. So the idea that the exiting shareholder of that next percentage, be it 40% in our example, is actually willing to issue a paper loan to that shareholder to be able to get the money over time. Okay. But that might be a long time, Craig. It might be a 10-year period for a vendor finance to be repaid.
yeah. And it's not always available too. So it's critical for that next generation business owner to be well aware of what all the options are before this happens,
Mm,
well aware of what financial position they need to be in, what kind of financial position the business needs to be in, and how all of that structure is going to work. Because the one thing I see a lot right now, Dean, is younger business owners about to step up to get their opportunity, but they've got big mortgages, the cost of living is going up, and they're geared up so
mm,
much that there's no more capacity for them to borrow from a personal sense to contribute to that business. Now,
absolutely.
so they've really got to be thinking through, talking to peers, working out what the best option is in terms of being able to succeed in that business. And now we're also seeing firms that are wanting to invest in advice businesses, who are seeing the upside in advice and that they know that there's great returns in the right advice businesses. But what people need to realize too is when those options are being advertised and thrown around and promoted out there and that type of thing, that for the investor, it's actually about a return on invested capital. Those
Mm.
people aren't really in the business of just lending money. They're
They're not
actually looking,
they're not a
yeah,
bank in that
they're not a bank.
context. They're not looking for 7%, or 7 to 8% would be the current lending rate at NAB and Macquarie,
Yeah,
approximately. And so, yes, if you've got um, a new shareholder coming in. So that's that third stage of succession, which is
yeah,
a great segue, Craig, is that if you as a young advisor got gifted 10%, managed to borrow, either leveraged against the business or vendor finance for that 40%, now you're a 50% owner, but you can't afford to buy the remaining 50%. Okay. It's going to happen more and more along the journey from here. And so can't afford to buy it. And you can't do much about it, even though at a 50% ownership. If the other 50% owner wants to sell, then this is where there's other groups with capital that are looking to come in and happily buy that 50% from you, or from the retiring shareholder, for example, and pay the shareholder a good value price for that. And then that new shareholder is focused on what their return on equity is for the business because they get 50% of the dividends. So
correct.
you can't sort of focus on half the business being super profitable to the corporate shareholder and the other half being just paying a wage. We've got to create a profitable business. So first and foremost, they're only going to buy in if it's profitable, and recurring revenue is not profit.
No.
So it's revenue. And so the key of all the businesses as you're getting through these stages is you might get offered, the valuation might be at 10%, it might be free or based on recurring revenue. The next 40% valuation might be based on recurring revenue because the business is smaller. When it gets bigger, it'll be an EBIT multiple. And so what happens at that point in time is that the 50% shareholder will be really focused on EBIT at all costs. And then the new shareholder that comes in will be no different. They will really be focused on EBIT at the same time, not to the detriment of anything within the business, but they're buying they need that return on capital, which is all linked to EBIT at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think the bit to add to that, mate, is that if you're going down that path of an investor and you're taking over a business, all of a sudden you've got to get really used to forecasting out. Because people are going to want to go, what does next year look like? What does 3 years? What does 5 years look like? You've got to be prepared then, as you just said, to really be able to explain the expenses and whether they're going to go up or whether they're going to go down. You need to be prepared to look for ways to reduce those costs or make them more efficient. And you need to be just in that real headspace of going, I can forecast out, I can see what the future of my business is going to do, and understand synergy. So if I get this many more clients, will I need another advisor? If I get this, will I need that? And that's something that's tough, I guess, for someone new to it. And so it's surrounding yourself with the right people to be able to model those things out as well.
Absolutely. It's that business management skill that may not that we're encouraging everyone to learn early in this example, because you're learning it early means that actually as you get into this situation, you can use those skills. The interesting thing, Craig, is that when this is the whole succession plan, is that potentially when you bought the 10% and the 40%, there was no discussion of an equity partner coming in. It was that that advisor, when you started having those conversations, might have been 55, then 60, then 65 or something to that effect. And then you realize you can't afford to buy the other half. And that retiring shareholder has to go forth and sell the business. Now, the flip side of it, and this is the other challenge of that third part of planned succession, is that what if that shareholder just stays a shareholder forever? So we're allowed to own BHP shares for as long as we like until we decide to sell it. And so the fourth part of this succession is to think and protect or think as to what happens if you can't find a buyer. Do you have to work in the business anymore? So this idea that BHP is not calling me up for any help whatsoever about their strategy, I just get to be a shareholder.
Well, that's their mistake, Dean. But
I know it's their mistake, absolutely. So if anyone from BHP is watching and they need business coaching and financial planning, let me know. But the point is that there's a passive ownership, and so there's an element and a risk whereby the retiring advisor, if we don't have a good succession plan in place, perhaps they just retire. They retire and you get a new advisor, you pay them a salary, and that retired advisor is receiving the dividends on that business.
So it's like an annuity stream, right?
It's annuity, absolutely right. And so that needs to just be thought out and discussed. There's no right or wrong in that example. If I'm the retiring advisor, perhaps I want to own a business that makes 30% profit every year in my retirement, and I don't have to do any work for it. It might cause the younger advisors stress, but if we haven't discussed it and that's the only thing that happens, it's either sell to a corporate or let me own it until such time as you're able to buy it off me, that might be the path. But that needs to be discussed early, because when you've got financial planning businesses that are small, that have advisors or owners that are not working in the business, creates a lot of tension.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Okay. So that's really key. So we've seen a lot of different examples recently, Craig. Just one that got announced today on LinkedIn from Ford Scott about going through this journey of making sure that we've got a succession plan in place. And the Tim announced it on LinkedIn, and so the benefit of doing that. Tell us your thoughts and thinking about how it helps the clients and the business overall by not
Yeah.
only having a succession plan but communicating that to the clients.
Well, I think that whole communication piece is really important, right? Like, people get very familiar with their advisor, and they kind of feel like they're going to stay there forever. But you know what? The thing that the advisor, in part is helping with his retirement goals, and funnily enough, that retirement's going to happen for the advisor as much as it is for clients. But I
Yeah,
think if you do what Tim and Ford Scott did today, it actually just shows your client base, it shows business partners, it shows people who interact with that firm that, number one, it's being thought about. Number two, that the younger generation coming through truly believe in that business. They truly believe in advice, that they're really happy in the environment that they're working in, and that they see a future for that business as well. And
yep,
so, as a client, you'd sit back and sort of take a breath and go, you know what, at some stage, I know that particular person may not be looking after me, but I know that the firm itself is, thinking about this and, continually making sure that they've got plans in place to look after us and maybe then my family well into the future.
absolutely. And it's crazy that we don't think about it first and foremost, but communicate it to clients.
Yeah.
And it's not that clients are thinking about it all of the time, but definitely as an advisor, that if you're an advisor that's approaching retirement, so let's call it 55 to 65, but probably more than 60. All your clients are thinking about it, and some of them will ask the brave question because they're brave about it, and others will just be left wondering what are you doing with succession. And so the idea that succession is so much more than, oh, Joe advisor over here, she's going to look after you from now on, because there's no confidence, like there's confidence in Joe in her ability as the example, but there's no confidence in who is going to be the owner and steward of the business going forward. And I think that that's the bit that gets missed by going, oh, Joe's going to take over your file, I'll be always across it, she's going to be in the detail. Like, that's fine for the 55-year-old range, but when you're in the mid 60s, like, and it could be any age obviously, but the idea is that you can't keep doing that when you're in your mid 60s and your clients are, you're at the bowling alley, the bowling green with your clients. So just that's kind of the next level of thinking about in how we communicate that from a business perspective to our clients. So that's really key, and reminds me that we should do an announcement, Bentley, about that as well, in terms of the business succession that we've done recently. So Craig, let's just turn it around a little bit into this unplanned succession.
Yes.
Why is it so hard to sign an agreement to sell the business if I die? Like, what is it?
Well, if I give the harsh reality to it,
Yeah, please. Oh, we're not here for sugarcoating.
yeah. Well, Dean, if you die and there's no one there to look after your business, then there's nothing there to sell because the revenue will more than likely be switched off and gone. And so, therefore, what are you going to sell? That's the full stop moment on it.
But I've got some client files, aren't they valuable?
Yeah.
So
You
let's
keep
just
telling
pause.
yourself that,
Let's
mate.
just drill down on that for a second. So
Yeah.
this is multiple licensees' opinions currently of how they tackle this situation in conjunction with the legislation, such that if you've got ongoing service agreements, and I would say also fixed terms, I'm not sure if there's a difference between that, but if you've got ongoing service agreements with clients and you're one advisor in one business and you die, there's no longer an advisor in that business to deliver on the ongoing service agreements.
Correct.
So therefore, licensees' views would be to either quickly find a marriage, which is hard, or turn off all the fees.
Correct. I mean, they're really your only two options, and you're
And
right.
which one's easier, being if you're an evil corporate?
Well, mate, the evil corporate's just going to turn it off, right? Because
Yes. Okay. Good.
it's going to be difficult to find someone to back in straight away, and I've seen it happen. Not in
Mm.
my
But
roles,
even if you were self-licensed and you were the RM and you died, like the money will keep coming in. There's actually no one to make the decision to turn off the fees. The money will keep coming into that bank account, but you can't continue to keep the fees.
no
And
service
it's
is being
very
delivered,
difficult to
right?
sell.
So no service is being delivered.
Yeah.
And this is why, unplanned shouldn't be unplanned. Like
Mm.
if you run your own advice business as a sole advisor, and there are a number of these businesses that are very, very successful, right? They're specialized, they're very fully priced, they make good money, they make good profit. But if you don't have someone or an agreement in place with someone that if something was to happen to you, to actually pick up and advise your clients and take over those relationships, then you've got to do something about that, like right now.
Mm. Yeah.
Because the reality is, and let's just be really honest, it's no one else's responsibility but yours to do that as a business owner with your own book. Now, that can array in a whole heap of different ways. I know we help single advisor practices out, Dean, by, you can license them under each other's cars. And there's no additional fees or anything for that because that's good succession planning. So that way, people have got each other backed up. So if someone was even on a holiday for a longer period or got caught away for a longer period of time and someone needed something, the other advisor can operate under that car.
So that definitely works for unplanned temporary succession, like as in someone can come in and help. And obviously the second part is if you've found that person that is your backup and therefore they're there in the event that you die, then you've still got to work out the dynamics of, are you selling something on death and at what price and whether insurance is involved or not. And you can't.
That's right, mate. And I think the types of chats that I'm seeing on that are, do you insure each other?
Yep.
Right. And so therefore, that policy pays the other person's family for that book of business. Or do you come up with a sensible agreement that's probably below market rate to say if there's an unexpected death, then what, you're going to have to buy this book. You may not be expecting to do that. So let's put it in at a below market rate so that I know my family's going to get something, but also my clients are going to be looked after. And you as a person that I completely trust to do that is also, benefiting from the challenge that you're about to take on.
Correct. It's not, we don't get free revenue if someone dies. Like there is work to happen as a result of that. And so if you've got a business with like $500,000 of recurring revenue, just as a really basic example, you might be saying that business is worth 3 times for the old numbers. So it's $1.5 million. That's selling a business whilst you're there to give great handover, great service. You get all your file notes done before you retire. No one's done all their file notes when they die. So there's always stuff that's, work in progress and getting messy and things like that. And so, but the thing about it is that if you agree to sell the business to your friend at 1.5 times recurring revenue and then take an insurance policy for 1.5, your family's the same. And so that's why you hit the nail on the head, Craig, is like, the advisor has to take the responsibility of just working out the numbers for themselves. Better to give a business to your friend at a low price and just take some life insurance than it is to completely ignore the fact that you need to do it, or have the audacity to think your business is worth 3 times recurring revenue when you get hit by a bus.
Yep. But also, mate, explain to your family what's happening. Make sure you tell your family, if something happens to me, this is what's going to happen with the business. This is how it's going to be purchased. This is what it's going to look like. This is the structure. This is the amount. Have them ready because they're going to be obviously mentally emotional. And
for that, most of them will be. Yeah.
We got a couple that might pop a cork, but it's as long as they know, then that makes it easier for that transition as well. Because
absolutely.
Then the other person's not trying to explain something to someone who's sort of mentally emotional and going through a tougher time working out other things.
Absolutely. And that's the idea that the agreement is already in place, such that after death, all we're doing is executing as opposed to negotiating. So the worst scenario, and we always talk about that husband and wife, like I don't want Paul's partner to be my business partner if he were
Yes.
to die, for example. But the the other difficult situation is that in that cross ownership or cross AR example is that you've promised that advisor that just died that you take on his clients, and then now you're having to negotiate around price with the spouse who's the executor, and that's an emotionally charged conversation, but also everyone will rationally want to maximize their sale price at that point in time.
Yeah.
And that's where having everything documented up front is absolutely vital.
Yeah, exactly right, mate.
And
And just working together.
it's not that expensive. Like
Yeah.
that's the other thing, the unsigned succession agreements uh, in a high percentage. So there's a lot of people that haven't done them, of course. Then there's another pool of people that have got unsigned succession documents, which is hilarious because they've already paid the lawyers for them. They just didn't put pen to paper at the end. And then there's obviously a small percentage that have gone through the effort of actually getting the discussions had and the documents in place at the end of the day as well. If you want to ask me how much it costs, send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'll tell you all the suite of documents that need to be created and why and how much they might cost you at different points in time. But I do, like we do in estate planning, Craig, from a financial planning perspective, there is value in making sure that you're clear on the conversations before you go down and see the lawyer, so that the lawyer is helping you document your decisions that you've already made and making you aware of things that you weren't aware of. That's still a role of the lawyer, but the big rock should already be decided before you get in that room.
Correct. Exactly
Wouldn't
right,
want to
mate.
pay lawyers to help you make a decision on some of these issues that can be solved based on industry norms, good, initial handshakes, and understanding of business values.
Most definitely, mate.
Good. What haven't we covered?
I think we've covered it all. I mean, I guess then there's just probably the last little piece is the planned, unplanned. So you might be, I know I'm sick, but I don't know when that might lead to my eventual passing away. And so I need to, transition my book from you. But during that process, I may pass away. And so I guess having clear plans even through that part of the process. And, a great example I've seen is a vendor finance in that situation because, you weren't expected to having to buy my book. So I'm going to vendor finance it to you, and I'm going to go through my treatment, etc. But then having it set up and the structure right that the estate can just take over that vendor loan should something, should death become earlier than expected and that type of stuff, and making sure people understand that as well. And I've, seen a very, very good example of that work out very well too, which again was tough conversations, which we've talked about before, David. Tough conversations, but open, clear, really honest with each other, communicate, and then it actually makes everyone feel really so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's our promise to our listeners, Craig. We don't know how many there are, but the promise to the listeners is that anyone that actually wants to help, anyone that wants help in having the conversation around what succession looks like, you can have Craig or I to help with that conversation. I think that spending a small amount of time with someone that's seen a lot of different scenarios now to cut through the history and the tension around the history, just to go, this is what we see it looking like. This is how you could do it. Let's go get that documented. For all our listeners, Craig, we're happy to do that.
We are very much happy to do.
And there'll be, if there's more than 1,000, they'll have to just wait in line. That's all.
Correct.
So very good. Okay. Next fortnight, we're continuing the conversation a little bit in and around this. So we've got a gentleman called Tim who's coming live from Brisbane but lives in Hobart, and he's a former financial advisor, now accountant, does a lot of business valuations in financial planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about valuations, what he's seeing in the market in terms of what they are, how they're going up and down, and what impacts them. And we're also going to spend a little bit of time on structuring your business as well. We had a great chat beforehand about whether, this idea of trusts and companies and all this kind of stuff of where best is to structure the businesses. So we're going to have some general advice and a general discussion around those things too. So that's will be Uncommon Sense number 38. So for all your listeners, see you in a fortnight. But until then, Craig, thanks very much. A great conversation.
Have a great day.
Cheers.